Dr. John Franklin, are you there?
Hello?
Hey, Dr. Franklin, how you doing today or tonight?
How are you?
I'm fine, sir. This is just very much an honor to have you on We.E.B Radio. We are very blessed to have you in our presence and still with us. This is Dr. John Hope Franklin, one of the greatest historians that this country ever produced, scholars, extraordinaire. I feel like he's the bridge between Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, and J.A. Rogers to Dr. Cornel West, Dr. Manny Marable, and so many other wonderful people. How you doing today, sir?
I'm very well. I hope you are.
I'm fine. It's an honor. And like I'm going to have to read out this list, but this list don't really sum up all your accomplishments, but just get the people an idea of who you are and the breadth of your work. You are past president of the American Historical Association. You are currently professor emeritus of history at Duke University. Your book, From Slavery to Freedom, has been in print since 1947 and have sold over 3 million copies. And I'm sure that anybody that's in college right now who took an African American studies course have seen this book featured prominently in the classroom discussion. You also served on Thurgood Marshall's legal defense team, which helped preparation for the 1954 landmark Brown v. Board decision. You was the first African American to chair a major history department at Brooklyn College. And you also went to Fisk University undergrad, and you got your PhD at Harvard University. And you recently won the John W. Kluge Prize or Award. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And that's basically like a $500,000 prize that you share with another distinguished person. And I'd like to get in, you also wrote a book called Mirror to America. That's your autobiography. And I'd just like to welcome you officially to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. And I'd like to ask you, because I had a chance to hear you speak when you came down to Tennessee back in October of 2006 at the Southern... Sir?
Where was that?
It was at the Southern Books Festival in Memphis, like October 15th, I believe, 2006.
Right.
And, I know you're 91 years young, and you told us that you only had one headache in your life, correct?
Yeah.
And when was this, sir?
Oh, when I was riding my tricycle in Invaluable, Oklahoma, I guess it was about 1918, and fell off the tricycle and hit my head on a piece of stone, and that's the only time I've had a headache. And
that's amazing. I mean, your brevity of your work and stuff like that. I mean, that's amazing considering the fact that, number one, that you're a black man, and also the subject matter that you deal with over your life, which includes history, but also feature heavily in race. So how did you come to this decision to become an historian? Because your father was a lawyer, right?
My father was a lawyer, yes. Well, it was not so much a decision as the enormous influence of one young white professor at Fisk University. And after I heard him lecture in the field of history and to give some notion of what history really was, I got so excited that I decided I wanted to major in history and become a historian. That was in 1931-32, my freshman year at Fisk University.
And why this heavy emphasis on African American history?
What's that?
Why did you decide to pursue this heavy emphasis on African American history?
Well, I didn't. I think it's probably erroneous to say that I emphasize African American history. I found that American history was not complete. No book that I found, no lectures that I heard, no conclusions that I heard described gave a full picture of the history of this country. And it was deliberately short-sighted to leave out African Americans. So what I did was to try to bring them into the full picture, because you couldn't have American history without having the history of all the people who made up this country. And certainly African Americans were in this country from the early 17th century down to the present time. They played a role in every aspect of it. So why do you leave them out? How could you leave them out? And what I tried to do was to bring them in and to give a fuller picture of the history of the United States, not so much about blacks, but about the whole country. And you can't learn about the whole country without learning about African Americans.
Did you face an uphill battle with your colleagues, fellow academics?
What's that?
Did you face an uphill battle to try to get this story or this perspective out?
No, I wouldn't regard it that. There's so much ignorance in the country and so much lack of understanding that when when you lay it out clearly and unequivocally that, that's the story, and I'll stand by it, and it was widely and generally accepted. It was just that you hadn't had it. No one had emphasized it. No one had called attention to the fact that you can't have the history of the United States without having the history of African Americans right along with it.
But I know, I remember you in the interviews, several interviews, talking about how hard it was for your book, your magnum opus, really, From Slavery to Freedom, to be taken seriously by the book reviewers. That you had a hard time getting the review by, let's say, the New York Times and other people. They didn't take you seriously. Oh, was this true? Or is this true? It's your mind, but what do you think was the reason?
Well, it was that they did not know any difference. They were people find getting new and unknown history. They find it difficult to put it in their mindset and in their thinking. That's what I found out. It wasn't that they were opposed to it. They were ignorant. They didn't know. And the moment they say, "No, look, here's the way it was. Here's the way the Battle of Bunker Hill was. Here's the way the Civil War was. Here's the way World War II was." When you begin to show them what happened, you begin then to find that they say, "Oh, is that so?" Or they might say, "Prove it to me." Or they might challenge you in some way. But I haven't found it difficult, extremely difficult, to bring about some kind of change when you know what you're talking about, and when you bring the conclusions to people with some force and some certainty, some understanding. And I get great pleasure in calling attention to the fact that this was left out. How in the world are you going to talk about World War I unless you talk about blacks from this country who served abroad, who were not good enough to be accepted in the United States Army? They were assigned to the French Army in World War I, and the French loved them, took them in. And then the people in the United States, the white people in the United States, was not only surprised but disappointed that blacks whom they objected to and they rejected were accepted with open arms by the French. And so the story of World War I gets to be changed when you talk about the blacks in World War I. The same thing is true in World War II. I know that very well because I was turned out. I volunteered in World War II because I thought that the United States needed skilled hands, particularly people who could operate business machines, who could type and do shorthand and run an organization. And so I rushed down and volunteered.
You actually volunteered as a black man back in 1940, whatever? I mean, you from Oklahoma.
I volunteered any of the other way. I volunteered, period. I happen to be an African American.
Yes, sir.
I volunteered, and the man told me, "Well, you've got everything but color."
Mm.
And I thought that was something deserving of Adolf Hitler.
Mm.
And so I said, I'm sorry. I thought there was an emergency, but I must be mistaken. There's no emergency. And I vowed then. This was in February 1942. I vowed then that they would not get me, that I would fight them as they were fighting the Germans.
Mm.
And my case was as good as the case of this country against the Germans. If they were fighting Adolf Hitler because of his views about race and that sort of thing, I could fight them because of their views about race. And I wasn't going. I wasn't thinking about going. And I said, I can beat them. And I did.
You sure outlive a lot of them. I know that much. I know that's a good thing. I said you sure did outlive a lot of them, and you got your recognition all the same, which is a very beautiful thing. It's a tribute to your dedication and your steadfastness to what you believe in. And like I said, I know you make it sound so easy, like the fact that you said you only had one headache during your entire life, but at the same time, you just tackling all these problems. Like, what helped you to have such a sunny optimism about what you was doing and about the future then?
Well, first I knew I was right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that gives you great strength when you know you're right.
Yes, sir.
I knew also that my parents stood behind me. My mother had died by the time World War II came about, but my father was still living, and the words of my mother were still in my ears and my heart. She stood by me. She had confidence in me. She knew that I could stand up to any adversity. I said, well, I'm not going to let these people worry me. My mother told me that when we put off a train in 1921 when I was 6 years old, and I was crying. We put off the train in the woods because she didn't get us up to sit where the blacks were supposed to sit because she refused to move us when the train was moving. And so I got off the train when my mother and my sister and I were put off out in the woods between Rennesville, where we lived, and Chakotah, where we were going. I was put off in the woods, and I started crying. And my mother said, "What are you crying about?" I said, "The man, so he put us off in the woods." She said, "Oh, that? Don't you cry about that. That's nothing." She said, "I want you to know that you are as good as anybody on that train." And they may believe it, but she said, "I do. And I'm going to see to it, I want you to see to it that you don't spend your time crying, but that you spend your time proving that you're as good as anybody on that train." She didn't say better. She said as good as anybody on that train. From that day in 1921 until this day in 2007, I've been trying to prove that I and anyone else was as good as anybody on that train, all the white people who were on that train. And that gives you a sense of security, a sense of self, a sense of self-esteem, a sense of belonging. And therefore, you're not going to fret yourself, not going to fret by being kicked off a train or something. That's nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think people worry about their disadvantages. Well, there are many disadvantages, many disparities, but they're not going to be helped or cured by fretting over them. Mm-hmm. They'll only be helped and cured by doing something about it, proving that you're as good as anybody else. And you do that by studying and working and focusing and being decent, being honest, and not whimpering, but standing up for your rights. And I've done that since I was 6 years old, and I'll do it until I'm 106.
I heard that, sir. I would like to put that in context. I know we almost, I guess, 2 years removed almost from Hurricane Katrina. But, to see those images of people at the Superdome, like trapped and whatnot, and standing on the top of their house stranded. But also back in 21, the Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots, Black Wall Street. And your father, got caught up in that. Can you please explain to us what happened to your father during that time?
What did you say this was?
The Tulsa, Oklahoma riots of 21.
Yes, what about it?
About your father, how he got caught up in all that stuff.
Yes, my father, we lived in a village called Rennesville, Oklahoma, and it was not a good place to make a living, not for a lawyer. There weren't that many blacks in the city, and the county government was controlled by white people, and all the judges were white, and all the lawyers were white, except my father, one or two people. And he decided to leave. He left, went to Tulsa, which was a larger, thriving town. Not all that much Black Wall Street. That's a romantic description, which is inaccurate, but I don't want to get into that. But he went up there and set himself up in an office and said he would visit us every month, 5 or 6 weeks, and he said he'd come for us as soon as he could get get things together. And so by the end of May 1921, he had things organized. By the end of May, my mother had finished her teaching her school. She was a school teacher in Invaluable, Oklahoma. She was finishing that. And so he said, get ready, I'm coming for you to take you to Tulsa. And we would be ready on this 1st of June. My father did not come because a riot had broken out in Tulsa, and he'd been seized and put in detention. And meanwhile, we didn't even know anything. You know, don't forget this, 1921, no radio, no telephones, no cell phone, no speedy transportation of any kind. And so it was days before we knew that a riot was occurring in Tulsa. And it was even longer than that when we knew that he had been detained in a place where hundreds of blacks had been detained, kept overnight and overnight and overnight, several nights, and that he was kept in detention for more than a week. When he got out, the riot was over by that time. Several hundred blacks had been killed, and he was practicing law in a tent. His office had been destroyed. He was practicing law in a tent, suing the city, suing the state government, suing the insurance companies, trying to get some relief for his clients, without much success, of course. And he wrote us a note saying that he was sorry he couldn't remove us then, and it would be some time before he could move us because he'd lost everything he had. And he was practicing law in a tent, you see. Mm-hmm. And so he would come to see us in a week or so and come with regularity. But it was 4 years before he could get enough together to bring us to Tulsa to live. And so in 1925, late 1925, December, we went to Tulsa. We moved to Tulsa. And the family was all put together once again. That was an awful ordeal, particularly for a young boy. I was 6 years old when it started. I was 10 when he finally came for us and moved us to Tulsa.
So I'm thinking he was never the same after that either, right? I mean, correct? He was never the same psychologically after that experience?
Well, I don't suppose any of us were the same, but the point is that you don't let these experiences get you down. Mm-hmm. You don't let them get you down. You pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get ready for the next fight, you see.
Yes, sir.
That's what you do.
Let me ask you this, like, how was it that, you meet this professor at Fisk, this white professor?
Yes.
We helped you with Harvard. How was your viewpoint of white people before you met this guy? Considering that you went through all this stuff in Tulsa.
Well, I had, as I say in my autobiography, Theodore Currier, that was his name, a young white professor, 12 years older than I was. He was the first white man to treat me as a social and intellectual equal. And he had enormous respect for me. I had enormous respect for him. He took me by the hand and taught me everything that he knew about history and indeed about the world. And it was he who was responsible for making the decision that I should go to Harvard to graduate school. And when my father could not raise the money to send me to Harvard, this young white man went downtown in Nashville and borrowed $500 and put it in my hand and said, money will not keep you out of Harvard. And with that, he gave me his blessings, put me on the train, and I ended up the next morning in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I would be studying for the next 3 years and where I would get my PhD degree in 1941.
That's amazing. Consider where you came from to this point. I got to ask you, Covey, is interesting because you look at the fact that you went to Fisk and then you went to Harvard. A lot of folks would seem to think that Du Bois would have some, kind of W.E.B. Du Bois, would have some influence on your decision as far as picking schools, as well as being a historian. But this is not the case, correct?
No, I didn't know much about graduate schools of any kind. Mm-hmm. And although my mother and father were both college graduates, they had not done graduate work, Mm-hmm. And so he was my advisor and my sole advisor. And this says Ted Currier, the white professor at Fisk, he was my advisor, and he told me that I should go to Harvard. I didn't have any problem doing that because I didn't know where else to go. And I got admitted in the spring of 1935 when I was a senior at Fisk. I was admitted to Harvard, but I didn't have my fare to even get to Cambridge, Massachusetts, saying nothing of paying tuition and expenses at Harvard. So it was Ted Currier, the white professor, who borrowed the money, loaned it to me, gave me a loan. I paid him back, and within a year I paid him back a loan of $500. And then I got a job washing dishes at Harvard, one of the clubs at Harvard, washing dishes for my evening meal. And I took in typing. I typed term papers and dissertations to make my room rent and the other things that I needed. So not only did he help me, but I helped myself by working. Now, when you work 3 jobs and going to graduate school at the greatest university in the country, Harvard University, you don't have much time for anything else. And but I worked, and I studied, and I made it grades sufficiently high so that my second year at Harvard, I had 2 fellowships, and I didn't have to pay anything out of my own pocket, and I was not allowed to work because I was on fellowships. And from then on, I had smooth sailing.
So you really didn't have what they call a social life at Harvard, correct? You was more into working.
Oh, I would on weekends. I'd go out to dinner with friends. I'd go out. I knew some people in the city of Boston, and I would go and visit them, like for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I didn't go. I didn't have anything. I couldn't go home for those holidays. Indeed, I didn't go home for any holidays when I was a student at Fisk. We just didn't have the money. Not only were we without money because of my father didn't make much money, but this was the years of the Great Depression. Everybody was not everybody, but most people were suffering from privation of one kind or another.
What was your most memorable experience at Harvard? Or most enjoyable? Yes, sir.
I suppose that my most memorable experience was when my professor, Arthur Schlesinger, Sr., recommended that the term paper that I had written for his class be submitted to the New England Quarterly for publication. This is my second year of graduate study.
Wow.
And I did. I submitted it, and it was accepted. And there I was publishing in a refereed journal, a very prominent journal, the New England Quarterly, when I was 22 years old. And I suppose the most memorable incident was when Dr. Schlesinger came to speak at the graduate students' club, the Henry Adams Club. And I was sitting there with all of my fellow graduate students. And Professor Schlesinger came in and said to them when he was going to make a talk that night. He said, "Before I get started, I wonder if all of you realize in this room that you have in your midst you have a published author." And he just reminded them that John Hope Franklin had been published in one of the finest journals in the country, the New England Quarterly. And
22, right?
My buttons almost burst off my shirt. That was a moment. That was a moment that my professor had recognized me before my peers, before my other graduate student friends. I was published. I had published an article. It's difficult to convey what that meant to me. But I hope you understand that not every graduate student was walking around that day or in this.
Yes, sir.
Publishing articles in one of the most important journals in the country. So it was a memorable moment, just a wonderful, wonderful moment. And I don't think I ever I don't think I ever got over it.
No, I'm glad you didn't. I mean, this probably would inspire you to do so many other things in your wonderful and illustrious career. I like to ask, since you're speaking to people that have influenced your path, I remember you bringing up how important it was as far as when you try to write your memoirs for Mirror to America. How it's funny, it's ironic that you being the historian that you are, that you would actually throw away a lot of your letters, personal letters from family and friends and whatnot, but you were talking about the importance of your wife keeping a lot of things. Could you please tell us how important your wife was to the development of your career?
Let me first say, I'll be delighted to do that. Let me first say that that was a foolish thing for me to do.
Yes, sir.
To throw away my letters. My letter, I heard from my mother every week. Heard my father every week. I had my term papers and all those things. Well, I did throw them all away, but you must remember too that in my early 20s, I was sort of a fly by night. I didn't have any home or any room or any trunk or any filing cabinet to put things away. I did well have a suitcase to take my few clothes in from place to place. So it's understandable. I hope you understand that I wasn't just throwing them away. I didn't have anywhere to put them.
Yes, sir.
And I threw them away.
I won't be too hard on you now. I mean, because you are a great historian, you are a great man. So I mean, I won't be too hard on yourself now, because you got a photographic memory.
No, I don't either. Let me just say this. I met Aurelia Whittington when we were both freshmen at Fisk, and my sister introduced me to her. My sister was my classmate at Fisk. We'd been classmates in high school and grade school. We were only 11 months apart in age. And she introduced me to Aurelia Whittington on a Saturday afternoon in 1931. And I got up the courage within a week to ask her for a date to take her to the homecoming football game. That would be in October 1931. And she graciously accepted my invitation because I had to work that afternoon typing in the public relations office. I was one of the typists typing up the story about the homecoming and that sort of thing. And so I didn't get a chance to take her to the dance. I met her when I finished my work. I met her at the dance. And she was my date that night, and she was my date every social occasion until the end of our time at Fisk, until we graduated in 1935. She first began to show signs of strength and support when I was a junior at Fisk. I was elected president of student government, but when I was elected, the dean at Fisk called me in and said that he hoped that I'd be willing to step down because they had someone else in mind. They had my best friend in mind. Mm-hmm. And I told him to let me think about it. So I thought about it, and I said, well, I don't care. I'm not interested in being president of student government. And then I spoke to Aurelia that evening. After dinner, we got together, and as we almost always did. And I said, well, the dean has asked me to give up the presidency of the student council. And she said, and what did you say to him? I said, I asked him to give me a little more time to think about it. She said, and you thought about it? I said, yeah, I thought about it. She said, what did you think? What do you plan to tell the students if you were going to give up the presidency? I said, they elected you. Mm-hmm. And now you might be prepared to tell the dean that you're going to give it up, but what are you going to tell the students who voted for you, who expect you to be their leader next year? What are you going to tell them? I said, well, I hadn't thought about that. She said, well, I think you better think about it. And she backed me right down. I said, I'm not going to give this up. I don't have anything. I can't tell the students that I'm not, that the dean of the college has talked me out of being their leader when they have all voted for me to be their leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, that girl really has some strength. And I had so much respect for her as a result of that. And then she, when I was a graduate student at Harvard and about to write my dissertation under Professor Paul Buck at Harvard, we went to Professor Slazinger's house for dinner one evening, and before it was funny, I was writing my dissertation, and they were having us a little dinner, and we went, and Professor Buck was there, and his wife, Sally, and Professor Slazinger and his wife, and some other people. And I saw Professor Buck, who was my dissertation advisor. He had Aurelia. By this time, we're married, and it's my last year. I'm getting down to the wire. I'm about to complete my dissertation. And I saw them, and we were all out in the garden, and he had her over in the corner talking to her. It looked like they were talking about something very highly confidential and very very strong. And I said, I don't know, what in the world is he telling her, and what is she telling him? And so when we got back home, we just married that a few months before. We got back home, I said, well, you and Professor Buck were certainly having a great talk there. What was all that about? And she said, well, it was about you, she said, and it was a very interesting conversation. She said that Professor Buck said to her that now that you're married to John Hope, I hope you will give him all the support that you can. And then he went on to say that, we expect great things of him, and I hope you will support him. Don't stand in his way. Let him fly. And she said, I have no intention of doing anything else but encouraging him every way that I can. She told me that. This was in 1940, I'm sorry. She told me that, and I said, that girl really is something. And she gave me support all the way in writing my dissertation. And in helping me when I was writing From Slavery to Freedom, you made reference to that. Mm-hmm. We were living in Durham, North Carolina. I was teaching at North Carolina College for Negroes, and I was trying to write From Slavery to Freedom. I didn't have an office at the college. There were no study rooms in the library. Our little apartment was it wasn't much bigger than the two of us to get around in. And I was sitting one night at the kitchen table while she was finishing up dinner and getting it ready, and we were about to sit down and eat. She said, and I was writing in my lap, and she was trying to set the table. And she said, you can't finish that book here. Says you don't have any room or any time or any space. Why don't you leave? Why don't you go to Washington? I said, me to go to Washington? I said, she said, yes, and you can get a study room at the Library of Congress and finish From Slavery to Freedom, and it'll be off your hands. And I said, that's a pretty nice description of what I should be able to do, but I can't do that. She said, but I'm working. And as long as I'm working, you are free to go to the Library of Congress and work, and I will support you. I'll send you money every week. And she packed me up and sent me off. No wonder I dedicated that book to her.
Wow, she was working.
And I've always said from that time on that She was the president and chief executive officer of the Aretha Franklin Foundation.
I heard that.
And she supported me in that, as she did in so many other things. One other example. One summer I was to teach at Cambridge University in England. I would later be the Pitt professor there. But I was just going over to teach some courses in American Studies. And I was going to take Aretha, and our little boy was about 2 or 3 years old. I was going to take them, and we would get a place in England, in Cambridge. And so I wrote to them in Cambridge to say that I was bringing my family, and could they find a place for us? And then the director of that summer program wrote to me and said that we had not planned for the visiting professors to have their families to come. He said we had hoped that the professors would live among the students. The students had been brought there from Oxford and Reading and Edinburgh and Glasgow and various places in Britain. He said we expected the students that we're bringing here to live with the professors and get very well acquainted. The professor could help them even when they were not in class and so forth. And in other words, they were inviting me to leave my wife, to come without my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned it to her. She said, "Oh, by all means, go." She said, "To go. This is a great opportunity for you." And I said, "But I plan to take you and Whit, my son." She said, "But we could go anytime." She said, "It's very important that you go and that you be a participant in the whole program the way they planned it, and we'll go to England some other time. Don't worry about that."
Wow, wow, that's amazing.
That's the way she was, all the time, thinking of me and not herself. Of course, later on, we would go to England and live in a magnificent home, and we would have our son. He was 10 years old by that time. We put him in school there, and we traveled to France, and we traveled to Morocco, and into Italy, and various places that year, in the big, long breaks we had at fall and summer, and Christmas and spring and summer, so that she got her just rewards. But she was patient and kind and very sacrificial and unselfish. And I thought that I was one of the luckiest men on the planet.
You still are one of the luckiest, man.
To have a wife like that, who didn't fret about where I was or what I was doing, but who gave me every support. And for that reason, for many other reasons, I gave her the same kind of support. And I want you to know that in due course, everywhere I had gone when she couldn't go, I went back when she was in a position to go so that she could go with me. That was true when I went to South America. It was true when I went to Australia once. I had to go by myself for 3 months, lecturing at the university there. And she couldn't go. And so later on, I made another trip to Australia, primarily in order for her to go. And I did the same thing in South America. I did the same thing in Europe. I did the same thing in Japan. I did everything to make amends for any sacrifice that she had made earlier.
And y'all was married for 59 years, correct?
We were married for 58 and a half years, yes.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, it's hard for you to stay married today seems for 5 months or 5 days, let alone almost 59 years. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, don't forget we had dated 9 years before that time.
Oh, so really y'all was together for
our whole life, our lives were spent together largely.
Wow.
We started when we were 16, and the library at Fisk University is now named for us, for my wife and me. And so I had Simeon Knox, who had already painted me for the Duke Library, and who had painted the Clintons for the White House. I had
African American. Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's a very distinguished painter in Silver Spring, Maryland. I had him to paint a portrait of my wife and me, not when we were 85 or 90 years old, but when we were 16 years old.
Wow.
Well, I was 17 by that time. She was 16. And we were sitting on the Fisk campus when someone took a snapshot of us. And so we took that as the basis for the oil portrait that now hangs in the lobby of the library at Fisk University. And so the students can connect with that. They see these two kids in 1932. They see these two kids sitting in the lobby. Well, who are they? They are the people for whom the library is named. They are the people who are important enough in the history of Fisk University for the library to be named for two alumni. Wow. So I was honored and pleased and delighted, really, to have that portrait of us painted and to have it placed in the lobby of the Fisk University Library. It's now called the John Hope and Aurelia Franklin Library.
I mean, it's very beautiful. And speaking of one of your other loves, how has your love of opera influenced your life and your career?
Well, it's always been a source of great satisfaction and pleasure and education for me. Mm-hmm. I began to attend the opera when the Chicago Civic Opera would close its season in Chicago and make two trips south. One was to Dallas, Texas, and the other was to Tulsa, Oklahoma. At that time, Tulsa, Oklahoma was referred to as the oil capital of the world. A lot of rich people there, that sort of thing. And so the opera company would come there and make a killing, I guess, every spring. I made an announcement one day at home that I was going to the opera, and my father said, "Isn't the opera going to be at Convention Hall?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, that's a segregated place, isn't it?" I said, "Of course it's segregated." He said, "And that's the place where I was detained during the riot." He said, "And you're going to go there? You're going to demean yourself by going there?" Well, I felt like a dog. I felt terrible. But I still wanted to go to the opera, you see. So I began to sweet-talk him, and both my mother and my father, they were stern. They didn't think you should segregate yourself voluntarily. They said some things you have to segregate. We had to ride in Jimco cars and that sort of buses and railway trains, but you don't have to. You don't have to go to the opera, you know. So you're going to willingly segregate yourself, demean yourself? I said, "But Daddy, I want to go to the opera." He said, "All right, you go on." He was pretty soft, you know. He said, "All right, you go on, but you remember when you get there that your mother and father would not go there. You remember also that you're demeaning yourself. You're voluntarily disgracing yourself." He just whipped me. He just gave me a tongue lashing in my life. But so I went. And I was squirming because I didn't want to make my parents unhappy. And yet, this was glorious, glorious music, marvelous scenes. I had never seen anything like it in my life. And so I went that spring, and I went the next spring. When you break the ice, once, you can always sort of get away with it. But I was always uncomfortable, and I told that story on a PBS program one day, and the director of the Metropolitan Opera Company was listening to that program, and he wrote me a letter. This is Joseph Volpe, who just retired last year as the director of the Metropolitan Opera. He wrote me a letter and said that I'm so sorry that you had to learn to love opera under the conditions you learned to love it. He said, but I'm glad you became an opera buff. I'm so happy that you did, and I want to just tell you that from now on, whenever you want to see opera, you can see it as my guest in my box at the Metropolitan Opera Company.
Wow.
And I took him up on it, and I saw many operas at the Met in that way. But I would go to the Met sometimes and wouldn't let Volpe know I was there, but because I didn't want to be too much of a panhandler. I was glad to have the privilege of sitting in his box, which is right in the center of the place. You know, a very privileged view of the director of the Metropolitan. After all, he can certainly have the best seat in the house. So I had the second best seat in the house.
Yeah, it was all good right there. And also, I guess because time is moving so fast when you're having fun. I mean, you're such a wonderful storyteller, and with such detail and enthusiasm and passion. I'd like to touch on a person. I'll get your opinion on. I think you got a very interesting story behind your first time meeting Dr. Du Bois.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, I had seen Dr. Du Bois at various times. Of course, he's a graduate of Fisk University, so that at least on 2 occasions he visited Fisk when I was a student. But of course, I didn't get a chance to meet him. I just saw him. He was up on the platform or something like that, and I saw him, but no meeting of him. And then when I was a graduate student at Harvard, he came to Boston to give a lecture, but he didn't come to Harvard. But my Professor Schlesinger, urged his students in his seminar, urged us to go and hear Dr. Du Bois. So I went down to Town Hall, Ford Hall Forum, and heard him there. And from time to time I'd see him and hear him, and I thought he was a great man, and so literate and so articulate and so brilliant, obviously brilliant. But I never met him. Then when I was working on my dissertation, I wrote a dissertation on the free Negroes in North Carolina, 1790 to 1860. These are free Negroes before the Civil War.
Wow.
When you might have thought, many people thought that all blacks in this country were slaves. Well, there were about 500,000 that were free in 1860. And I was working on that. Segregation couldn't have been more deep and complete than it was in the 1930s and 40s. And when I came to work on that dissertation, I got a room in a house, but I wasn't able to fix my own meals and that sort of thing. Didn't have any facilities. So I went to the Arcade Hotel, which is a small but very fine hotel and restaurant in downtown, operated by blacks, for blacks. You couldn't go in any kind of white establishment, hotel or restaurant. And so I ate there at least 2 meals a day. And one Saturday evening, I shall never forget it, I was sitting in the dining room, fairly large room, and over on the other side, I saw Dr. Du Bois. I should add that this little hotel in Raleigh, North Carolina, was one of the very few places between Atlanta and Washington that blacks could go to the toilet and have a meal, and even stay overnight and that sort of thing. So there was Dr. Du Bois, obviously coming from Atlanta, where he was teaching at Atlanta University, and probably going north to New York. And I saw him sitting over there. You have to appreciate the fact that he is one of the most celebrated African Americans of his time, if not the most celebrated. And here I am, a young graduate student, and sort of star-studded. I mean, he was a star, and I wanted to meet him. And so I went over to his table. I got up from my table and went over to his table. He was reading and having dinner at the same time. He's sitting alone. And I approached him with some reserve, some reservation. And I said, Dr. Du Bois, my name is John Hope Franklin. Well, I thought then that he would certainly jump to his feet and throw his arms around me because I'm named for his best friend, who was a professor at Morehouse College, and my father was there. And my father just worshipped him. And I said, my name is John Hope Franklin. I don't know whether it's registered with you, but it did not register with him. He did not even look up. Just continued to read and to eat his meal. I said, this will knock him off his feet. I said, I'm a graduate of Fisk University, the class of 1935. I knew that he was a graduate of Fisk University, the class of 1888.
Right.
And already he'd been out for nearly 50 years. And so I thought he would sing the Golden Blue, the alma mater song, and really perform with me. After I told him I was a graduate of Fisk. I don't know how you reacted to it, but he did not react at all. He acted like that I was not even on the planet, to say nothing of in that room. Well, I've got only one other way to call his attention, and that is to tell him that I am in graduate school at Harvard University, and I'm here working on my dissertation. Well, he was the first black to get a PhD from Harvard, and in history and so forth, and I just knew that would strike a chord with him, and he would jump up and shake my hand and say, "Go to it, boy, go to it." And he did react. He didn't look up, but he reacted. He simply said, "How do you do?" And that was the only thing he said to me. And I was very much speechless. I didn't know. I didn't have anything else to say. What did I say? And he retreated. I retreated across the room to my table and finished my dinner and snuck out of the room. I never felt so humiliated all my days. Well, later when I was elected chairman of the Department of History at Brooklyn College, and my picture was on the front page of the New York Times, and all that sort of thing, I got a letter from Dr. Du Bois welcoming me to the city of New York and inviting my wife Aurelia and me to have dinner with him and his wife. So I had at long last become worthy of his presence, I guess, or something like that. And so we went and had he was a marvelous host, had a great time, lots of good food, good drink and everything. And he was so cordial and so warm and friendly. And later on, I said to him, I tried to meet you in 1839. And I told him the story, and he got a big chuckle out of it. He thought it was very funny. I didn't think it was very funny, but he thought it was quite funny. He just chuckled over it and he said, I'm rather shy. Well, I didn't believe that. And he said, I don't meet people very well. And then he went on to say, and of course, I'm always preoccupied with something I'm thinking about to write or something. And that's all he said. That was the only excuse he gave. We remained friends until his death, and more and more friendly. We had several meals with him. He wouldn't accept our invitation. He said, I can't control my time if I'm in your house, but I can control my time if I'm in my house. And he said, when we were there, he said, well, it's my bedtime. I go to bed at 10 o'clock. He said, when I don't know the people, I tell them it's the doctor's orders that I go up to bed at 10 o'clock. He said, I don't tell them it's Dr. Du Bois' orders. So
that was a good way with words.
Yeah.
Well, I ask you this, like, I mean, I know we're running out of time. I just like, what was the most impressive person you ever met in your life? Who was the most impressive person?
Oh, I don't really know. Probably Dr. Du Bois.
And also, like, how would you want to be remembered? Or how would you want your legacy to be remembered?
I just hope I've dedicated my last book, my autobiography, to my students.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best way I could be remembered is through my students and my writings. I've taught thousands of students, and I hope they remember me, and I hope they have repeated some of the things that I've said to them, and I hope they've also discarded some of the other things that not worth remembering. And I hope that they have been strong in their allegiance to the truth and the balance in history and that sort of thing. And with them and my writings, I would beg to be remembered.
Well, yes, sir. I would just like to say that I consider myself indirectly one of your students. I mean, you've really been an inspiration to me for most of my life. As soon as I found out about who you were several years ago, and I'm glad that the creator saw fit to create somebody like you, a man so passionate and truly loves his people and loves people in general, to do what you did and to keep on doing what you're doing over the course of your wonderful, blessed life. I mean, it's really an honor to be talking to you right now. And I just say that, you know, out here you got a lot of people that you might not know exist. They know you exist, and we love you madly, like Duke Ellington would say. We love you madly.
You're very kind. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Dr. John Hope Franklin, for sharing your wisdom, yourself, and your time and insight with us today on We.E.B Radio. This hour doesn't really do you a justice at all, but I'm just thankful that I can look back on this day and tell my kids, my grandkids, about this wonderful moment I had with this amazing man, one of the most important figures in American that America ever produced. You know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sir?
You're quite welcome.
Yes, sir. No, I am. I am very quite welcome. So that does it for this edition of We.E.B Radio.